One. Hello and welcome to this month's coffee break. GenAI, RAG, say what? Going beyond the AI buzzwords to business value. My name is Andrew Miller, your host, lead principal technologist at Pure. I'm joined again by Miroslav Klivansky. Miroslav, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here, and thanks for asking me to come back.
You definitely would have you back more often if I could. Rob Ludeman sometimes says that I'm Pure Report. I know what it means. We'll get into introducing you and the topic, a little bit of housekeeping, hopefully the non-boring housekeeping at the beginning. This is a series, coffee break series. We are actually now on month 40. We've kept all of them online for you and think that actually they've aged better over time thanks to the solution focus and the educational focused. First half is more educational, second half is what Pure is doing in that landscape or that area. You can find them at purestorage.com/events. And for those of you who do join, hey, there are gift cards involved. And a special welcome to those in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, potentially joining us. There's actually some details here on this page for you about the first 500 participants joining, or the first 100 in EMEA region. There are some folks where we greatly appreciate that you join us, but we can't actually send you gift cards, with the exclusion, of course, in this case, EMEA does apply here, as it says there. And there will be a drawing at the end. If you want to stay for that, please do. My name is Andrew Miller, your host, lead principal technologist Americas here at Pure Storage. I've been here about 5 years. In this case, I usually don't do a full introduction, as you know, but I mainly talk about, where I may have a little bit of background in here. And I think about my first time actually handling large amounts of data and the data flows and realizing, actually, it may sound even a little weird. This is going to take me back to the doing OLAP, OLTP, batch jobs. You're just trying to crunch through massive amounts of stuff, and then things start to overlap. And how stuff can fall apart when unintended jobs and batch processes overlap, and you're like, oh, I'm learning something in a kind of painful way here. However, I'm really glad to have back for a second time Miroslav Klivansky. Miroslav, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So my name is Miroslav. My role right now is global practice lead for AI and analytics. So I work a lot with our field teams to support our customers, help design solutions that, solve real problems. I've been at Pure for about 5 years now, so probably joined around the same time as Andrew. And in that time, I've stayed focused on AI and analytics. Here's my various handles and contact stuff. I've been doing this sort of tech stuff for probably close to 30 years. I kind of joked with Andrew that the first computer I used professionally had a turbo button. So it's been that far back. Lots of storage experience. I worked at Meta for a while, a bunch of startups in the analytics and storage space. Never finished my PhD, but was working on some performance and capacity planning stuff at Georgia Tech. And then in terms of fun stuff, I have wife and daughter. I like, reading, mostly just brain candy, nothing too challenging or serious. Welding's kind of a fun hobby when I actually make the time for it. And then just traveling, hiking, going out for a walk. So that's me. And thanks for bringing me back.
We geeked out a little bit about the welding, so I'll ask someone to, you can hit the recording 2 years ago for a little bit more about the welding. That's cool. It's a cool mix of physical,
it was fun,
tech, all that. Okay. Last items before we dive in. As this is a series, I want to make sure to highlight next month, when 1 + 1 = 3, outsized impact of taking Flash from niche to mainstream. I'll actually be rejoined again. It's not always repeat guests, but sometimes, by Justin Emerson. We're actually going to wander into a little bit of kind of the idea from niche to main adoption and how technologies and platforms start, germinate, and then hit mass adoption. This is concepts from Crossing the Chasm, Gartner Hype Cycle, other things we wish we'd known better when we were customers about adopting technology, and then how Flash has gone from niche to main adoption, and then even how that's transformed Pure and even the impact that Pure can have as we become more pervasive, as frankly our portfolio has grown, but the outsized impact that can have. Okay, enough said. Please join us next month. The one other note is that hopefully we have coming in right about 2 months our yearly conference, Pure Accelerate. So I want to make sure to go ahead and highlight a little bit there. lives are torn here. Sometimes you're like, I want to do the voiceover. It's more than 50 live sessions. Keynotes, breakout sessions, product demos, brand certifications free. Discover, connect, and Peer Accelerate 2024. Hope you can join us there. I think Olivia is tossing the link in the chat there. That is actually free registration. And of course, there's things like hotels and airfare, but the registration is free. So with that, I think let's go ahead and dive in, Miroslav, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The agenda, as always, is a little bit lightweight. When you and I were chatting, if anything, it feels like we're hearing a good bit of kind of AI fear of missing out, or AI FOMO, maybe, if you will, that's out there. And you're not alone if you're thinking that. As always, we're going to do about the first half kind of educational, where we're going to do a little bit of an update from what AI meant 2 years ago and the major shifts to today. Then dive into a couple specific concepts you might have heard about. Fine-tuning, RAG, retrieval augmented generation. That's about fitting AI to your business. Ready for this? Is actually then talking, frankly, about how Pure has architectures, a platform that's built for data and throughput, and how it actually helps you with some of the things we've talked about in the first section. And then last but not least, as there continues to be new partnerships and solutions in the space, we'll want to make sure to hit those, whether it's BasePod or GPU Direct or GenAI or MLOps or Area or OVX. There's so much out there. Yeah, some of them are buzzwords. But I think if it's all right, Miroslav, let's just start with going back to really actually the last time that you joined at Sandeep on last year, and then we dove into some Pure One pieces. But I was thinking about, kind of what AI meant 2 years ago and some of the major shifts since then. Do you mind kind of just rewinding your brain about 2 years and starting from there
Sure.
in the highlights?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is kind of cool to think back, because like 2 years ago, I think a lot of what we were talking about was analytics and, sort of the analytics and AI maturity curve that different enterprises experience. And the AI piece of it was very aspirational for most enterprise customers out there. That's sort of what we were definitely seeing back then. And if you drilled into AI, a lot of what that was about was figuring out how to train AI models. And there are a couple of, fairly large players that knew a lot about AI, creating AI models, putting them into production. And these were like the hyperscalers, other fairly large players. A lot of the large e-commerce companies out there have been using like recommendation engines and AI with recommenders, things like that for a while. But for most enterprise customers, it was very aspirational. It was really just kind of cool ideas and potential that was out there. And figuring out how to actually operationalize AI and make it relevant for your business and put it into production, like that was still very far out and theoretical. And what has really changed is, thanks to OpenAI and ChatGPT,
Hey, bingo! You said ChatGPT. There you go.
Yes,
Yeah.
ChatGPT. I mean, I think that's probably one of the most popular buzzwords out there in the AI space. I have a ChatGPT premium subscription. I use it, to kind of make my life easier in a number of different ways. But those large language models and, another buzzword that might be useful is foundation models. These are like the big, very training intensive and resource intensive to create models that are being used as foundations to build something else. Those are out there now. OpenAI, kind of was one of the big creators of this stuff. Google, Meta with Llama. Those are other sources of, powerful foundation models. And what ChatGPT did was make it very accessible and approachable. Like it made it so everybody's grandma could use AI, right? You just jump online and ask questions. Like, yeah, exactly. So it wasn't the science or the research behind large language models, like the transformer model that's being used to power things like GPT was actually based on a paper and research Google did like back in 2017. So this is, 6, 7 year old research at this point, but it didn't really get popularized
Mhm.
until pretty much like end of 2022, 2023. Um, so that was the big shift. In the last 2 years, the big shift was really the awareness of large language models, what they can do. And um, then it became kind of much more clear as to how everyday businesses could take advantage of AI, right? Because you could use large language models to do things like introduce a certain level of reasoning into
Mhm.
what goes out there. You can summarize information. You can create a Q&A chat bot that can share information about your products, your documentation. You can use this stuff to help you write code. All of these were use cases that are relevant for pretty much every enterprise out there. And now they're accessible, right? That's a big shift.
The other piece I think about, and we were chatting about this, and for those joining, I'm playing host because I'm here to make my amazing guests look good, but also, we chat about stuff, observe things. And one of the things that we were chatting about that I found really interesting is that there's even this different use of the different LLMs, large language models. So if this is just helping folks out there, get the acronyms in your head, large language model, LLM, is that some companies are focused on actually that is their product. That is what they're focusing on. That would be an open AI. But then there are other ones, like you mentioned, Facebook, and they're doing Llama, which is, fun with LLM, say the LL and the M and Llama are capitalized, right? For them, they're open sourcing it because actually for them and their business model and how they focus, they don't want that to become too much of a competitive advantage for other companies. And there's lots of other industry analysis out there. So I'm playing a little bit of armchair analyst, but it's
Yeah.
not even just the release of these models out there, but sometimes very different companies with very different business models embracing this. And that leads to some really, really interesting dynamics. So back to you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's actually just really cool and fun. If you're a technologist, if you've been kind of in this space,
Mhm.
seeing this happening, right? Like in the same way that you saw a little bit of competition between Linux and some of the commercial operating systems out there, you're seeing a little bit of this tension between commercialized AI and large language models and open source ones that people can, more freely build on top of. And like Llama for Meta is a little bit like it's not totally open source. Like there are some commercial
Thank you.
restrictions and things like
Thank you.
that. Like, you can't actually build a social network, or I don't know. I'm just assuming that that's one of the restrictions is, there's certain things you probably shouldn't be using Llama for according to your agreement, but it's open, it's accessible. There's other kind of open source communities that are building, like much more fully opened models that
Mhm.
are accessible to everybody. So it's exciting.
I think two last points maybe to draw out. I'll toss the first one at you is um, it feels like at this point for the average company coming in or average person, team, you mind kind of contrasting the level of where they had to start, 5, 6 years ago, or even 2 years ago, to the level of where they can start today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think let's talk about 5 years ago because it was a little bit more clear cut. Um, there was a bunch more, there was a lot of research out there that talked about AI models. And a lot of it was, fairly academic. There were papers with, some math shorthand. Sometimes there was code published to GitHub. And you pretty much needed to understand how to go from academic published papers to an operational product in order to take advantage of AI. There is some code that you can sort of recycle and reuse and build on top of, but not only were the AI models less sophisticated 5 years ago, you had to do a whole lot of heavy lifting to use them to the advantage of your business, right? Um, Today, the models have gotten a lot more powerful. They're fairly, sophisticated and debugged, and a lot of the code is out there between GitHub and Hugging Face, which are, sort of open source
Makes me smile
repositories.
whenever I say that, or you do, or anybody does. So
Yeah,
keep
so
going
Hugging
base.
Face, if you hear about Hugging Face, think of it as like some combination of GitHub and Reddit for geeks interested in AI, right? It's an open source
Definitely.
community for AI. Um, Lots of models that are published. They also run kind of a paid for service that lets you stand up your model and, put it out there, make it available on the internet if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a great community. But what it means for organizations is practical AI is much more accessible. There's much less heavy lifting that you need to do. The code is more mature, the models are more powerful, and the what we would call the ML ops ecosystem and workflows are much better defined. So that's another set of buzzwords to touch on. But essentially, you know, if you think about DevOps, ML ops is the machine learning and AI version of DevOps, and it's out there, and it's getting better and more mature. There are commercial services and offerings that make it even more accessible and user friendly for organizations that kind of want to focus much more on their business than the process of using AI. Um, and that's also pretty new. I would say it's not the last 2 years, but MLOps has been evolving, let's say, in the last 3-4 years, and continues to evolve and get better and more user friendly.
I think the last piece, and I may go here a little bit and then toss it back to you for one comment as we wrap up this section, is there's also for folks that are watching out there, you've probably seen crazy, amazing kudos to my friends and peers at NVIDIA around around the company trajectory and the stock trajectory, and they were from a sales and a GPU standpoint, and want to give credit to datagravity.dev as you see here, sourcing. But even when you look at who is buying GPUs, it's largely some pretty big names, the vast majority. And there was even some pretty fascinating analysis that I heard about, how much applicability we really have for some of what the GPUs are doing. Now, obviously, there's some outliers there, potentially Tesla with video processing, but there's actually a lot of what's going on here with the GPU purchases of the foundational belief that there will be a huge market here, and that as these companies, you need to get ahead of this from a GPU standpoint. As well, when you actually look at their balance sheets, due to current regulatory environments, this is definitely armchair analyst side, they actually can't spend a lot of money on acquisitions, and they have a lot of cash on their balance sheets. So it actually makes a lot of sense for them to overinvest relative to the immediate return in GPUs, just compared to having the cash dragging down their balance sheet. So this is going back to a little bit of accounting. Maybe it's not 101, like 301 in financial analysis, and a little bit of macro and micro, but there's even some interesting trends there to unpack around. You see, and I saw even the comment hype in the chat about the hype, because there are crazy purchases here from a GPU standpoint and long lead times. There are people doing really legitimate things. And there's also this whole factor of the hyperscalers regulatory environment for acquisitions and balance sheets that also plays in, which to me was fascinating as I was learning about that.
Yeah.
Help me out with what I left out there, Miroslav, or got wrong.
No, I think you touched on some really interesting points. Like, one of the kind of funny discussions that happens in this space is kind of this talk of the GPU rich and the GPU poor. Because if you
Yeah.
have access or the budget to buy access to GPUs, there's sort of one set of things that you can do. And training some of these large models from scratch is one of those things. But just in general, there's a scale of what you can do when you have access to a lot of GPUs. And there's, if you don't have access to a lot of GPUs, but you still want to do stuff around AI, there's a different class of stuff that you can do, right?
Mhm.
And even with all of those large purchases out there in the clouds, and like, let's say the tier two GPU cloud vendors like CoreWeave, um, there's still a shortage of GPUs. Like, people are having trouble reserving GPU instances in AWS, right? Like sometimes I was talking to one AI researcher, and he was telling me that it's so hard to, or at least, I mean, this was maybe 6 months ago, maybe the situation has changed, but like 6 months ago, he would have a hard time just getting an instance with a GPU attached. So like he would reserve instances just so that they would be available when he needed to go and run something on a GPU.
Which
And
exacerbates the problem actually in a way, but it's rational. Yeah.
exactly, it's a rational action that
Uh-huh.
it's a reflection of this stuff. Um, Hopefully that's kind of loosened up. It's also one of the motivations that we're seeing for people to build their own AI data centers and, have on-prem infrastructure that they have full control over so that they're not kind of at the whims of availability in the cloud providers.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but it's real, and I would say that for most enterprises, they will have a small amount of on-prem or like, data center capacity that they own around GPUs and AI. And um, a lot of it will be used for inference rather than training. And inference is another buzzword. That's basically when you're using the AI model to do what it's supposed to do, right? So you give it inputs, it gives you outputs. That's inference. Training is when you're trying to create that model and make it more and more accurate for its task.
But that I think well, it's not really pause because section 1 and 2 are related, but not stop, but it's pause. Olivia, if you don't mind, I think we'll go ahead and launch the first poll. And this is maybe a little bit of a palate cleanser, but as always, we will share these back for everybody here, so you can see what 1,000 or 1,500 of your closest peers and colleagues are doing in this space. So how AI ready are you, or which of these AI ready ingredients does your organization have? And we were kind of thinking around the pathway of where this might be. So you can, and also please make sure to put things into the chat. We do have some amazing folks, Robert Alvarez, Melody Zacharias, Josh Lay, that actually are deep experts on all of these areas as well, that if you have things in the Q&A or the chat, they can actually both respond to them. We'll do some Q&A at the end. Of course, that's the Q&A throughout is the great folks that we have helping us today. Moving into section 2, which is still a little bit general, there are two kind of hot areas here I think we've been talking about that have coming up. The idea of as we get past, okay, there's been an explosion from an AI standpoint. It's a lower bar to entry or a higher point where you can start out, like we were just discussing. But then we start to think about how does this become applicable for the enterprise or for business, and two key concepts there. The first would be around fine tuning. That we want two concepts we want to explore today at least. The first would be around fine tuning. The second would be around RAG, that was in the title, or retrieval augmented generation. So we're just going to take this section to kind of walk through those two. Miroslav, if you don't mind, I'll let you. Actually, I'll just go here because this is going to be like, oh, cute pictures, fun pictures. You're carrying a corgi, but we're going to weave this into the fine tuning explanation. But do you mind kind of walking us through what fine tuning, what it is, what it means, how it applies to business?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, training a model is this fairly resource intensive, long-term, complicated process. But what we can do with available models out in the marketplace, whether you're sort of buying access to somebody's model via an API or deploying an open source model, in your own infrastructure, is you can fine tune that model. If you think of that model as sort of this, large, you know, cube or matrix or, n-dimensional space with a bunch of different nodes and, transitions between those nodes that have weights and probabilities to them. Um, what you can do in fine tuning is adjust some of those weights and probabilities. But to retrain a large model or fine tune that large model on your own data is also pretty resource intensive. You need the infrastructure to kind of load that model and be able to train it. So, what a lot of people are doing for fine tuning, which is refining the model to understand your data, is using a technique called LoRa. And I think it stands for a low rank adaptation, but it's essentially a clever shortcut for being able to train, a small number of these external layers that might live, in front of and behind a foundation model. And then you're using that kind of fine-tuned LoRa to change the knowledge and behavior of your model. So one way of thinking about it, and this is potentially a bad analogy, right? Is
We're here for the bad analogies. What do you think we do every month?
so like one way I sometimes think about it, and my background is a library, one of my favorite libraries, but you could think about it as the foundation model is, your standard incoming freshman in college. They have a decent high school education. They know how to read. They know how to do, some basic math, and, they know how to reason. And that's sort of what a foundation model can give you. But they don't know anything about your business. They don't know specialized areas, like architecture or, accounting or whatever else. So if you want them to do some of this stuff, you could send them to the library with a homework assignment and says, hey, there's all this information in the library, find it out and do your homework in these specialized areas. So that library analogy is sort of RAG, the retrieval augmentation, the lookup, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But what fine tuning is if you basically gave that incoming college student a textbook on accounting and said, okay, read and memorize this textbook and then answer these questions, right? Because the fine tuning sort of shoves a certain amount of specialized knowledge into that model and lets that model kind of include some of this specialized information. The reason we have those cute pictures on there is this is probably the most common and approachable way that people have encountered fine-tuning models. So there are image generation models out there. A lot of them are essentially stable diffusion, is sort of the core model. And you can fine tune it with different styles, right? So these different styles are essentially LoRa's that are put in front of this standardized image generation model. And you can ask for whatever image you're interested in a certain style, and that is fine tuning that model, right? So that's sort of when Andrew and I were talking, that was the analogy that kind of seemed most accessible. And in the same way, go ahead.
We had a lot of fun with actually trying a kangaroo carrying a corgi in cartoon style. For frankly, sure of the rights, but it came up with some really interesting options. So I was like, okay, that was fun.
Yeah.
I think if it's all right, Miroslav, I am watching time and want to make sure we get to sections 3 and 4. We do have a full-on, I want to make sure to mention this, actually literally next week, one of the folks that's helping us in the background here, Robert Alvarez, and some great folks from NVIDIA, actually a webinar focused on enhancing LLMs with RAG and accelerating the pure storage in NVIDIA like you would think. But if you don't mind, Miroslav, just maybe briefly, I mean, RAG is taking domain-specific info, putting it in a special database, and then using that to make things more meaningful, smarter. And there's pieces about vectors and tokenization. Do you mind if I can push you to do a minute or two there, and then we'll
Sure. I'd love to. So, we were talking about the library analogy where you can look up domain-specific stuff and use the knowledge that you look up in that library or, today in the internet to answer the queries, right? So if you just sort of go with a foundation model, it doesn't have a lot of specialized information. you can't really use that in your business, right? Like foundation models are such that there's general knowledge, there's some basic reasoning, and if you ask it business specific questions, it'll make up an answer. If it doesn't know it, it'll just make something up, right? And that's called hallucinations. So you don't want your business and your business's customers subjected to hallucinations from these foundation models. What you want to
Sorry, kid,
do
wrong.
is add
Yeah.
some guardrails and make sure that you are providing domain specific accurate information from these models, and that's where retrieval augmentation comes in. You can take your relevant information and basically put it in a type of database that makes it very that helps provide meaningful answers to the kind of queries that enterprise AI kind of needs to handle. And Robert will present like on the next webinar about like some cool RAG applications that they built out. But it's a cool technique. There's vector databases. People talk about vector databases, and then those vector databases store the business relevant information in a specific format that makes it relatively easy to retrieve information that is semantically relevant and meaningful to the queries that are made to that database, right? So like in some ways, what you want to do is pull out records that are have similar meanings, right? So it's not like you're matching keywords, although that could be part of it, but you're also like pulling out records that have meanings that are similar, right? So a lot of times that's called cognitive search or semantic search, and that's part of what vector databases enable. Vector database or vector search, those types of capabilities are showing up in standardized or I should say relatively common databases. So for example, in a lot of AI businesses, they're using Postgres with an extension called PG Vector to do the vector stuff. But Cassandra added vector search, Elasticsearch added kind of vector capabilities. I think MongoDB did as well. But then you also have specialized vector databases like Milvus, Pinecone, a bunch of other ones out there to make that happen. Anyway, I might have gone a little deeper than, but you combine a vector database with the queries, you retrieve context from the vector database and give it to that large language model and say, hey, answer this question, but keep all of this stuff in mind because this information is relevant to answering your question accurately. And then you can also sanity check that answer against stuff that's in the vector database. When
that, we will go to poll number 2. That's our, actually, let me, before I do that, I'm going to share, and I'll end and share this one back here just for folks to see. And you and me too, Miroslav. So how AI ready are you? First 2 levels are 3737. Clear idea, set of data. Already invested is 25. 18 is actually, that people have developers and data science. We did get some comments in the chat, which I agree with, is more options would be good. And I agree. We were thinking about those, and it's like, oh boy, how many do we put in here before you just look at the options? You're like, it's too many. I'm not gonna answer the poll. So if you do have more perspective on this, please feel free to put it in the chat. Olivia, if you don't mind going ahead and sharing poll number 2, and we will let that go ahead and sit in the background. Where are you in adopting AI? So this is a little bit different. The first one was a little bit more practical in some ways. This is a little bit more of maybe the stages of where you are. We're going to leave that up as now start to kind of transition to a little bit of hopefully you've gotten a sense. Miroslav, and by extension, some of the great folks up with Q&A, they know a lot about this space. I'm really happy to have them up here because AI is a hot enough space. They could be other places doing this stuff. So, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad they're here. But it's because we have some great things that we can do to help from an architectural standpoint. And there's even some humor here. I'm gonna steal your joke, Miroslav. Sorry about, that on one hand, in this space, folks want storage to be invisible. And so it's Pure, we can help with that in ways that others can't. If you join previous coffee breaks, you already kind of know some of that with just how Pure is structured with evergreen and simplicity, et cetera. At the same time, data really matters. So we want it to be invisible. We want storage to be invisible, but data is critically important, and you need a platform to handle that. So there's even maybe a little bit of embracing the contradictory humor there, if you will. But instead of running through a whole bunch of, frankly, kind of product pieces, I thought we'd just kind of actually park on this slide, which is there's a little bit here that you can see about all the different variables from throughput and access and job types and stages, all this kind of stuff. And really maybe just talk about three architectural principles that are the ones that you see, or Miroslav, you to the audience, that Miroslav sees as what make the most difference. Design patterns, there's architectural choices, and then there's some unique values. So maybe Miroslav, I'll toss it back over to you. Do you mind kind of talking about the three key design patterns that you see?
Sure. So, a lot of what we're seeing out there and kind of that we see as successful in this space are, I call them design patterns. They're sort of things that are trends that work out there. One is disaggregation. And essentially, from the storage perspective, it means separating storage from compute, whether that compute is CPU or GPU. But by separating storage from compute, you get to scale each one separately depending on your needs. And it also gives you more degrees of freedom operationally. So, like, for example, if you have failures on the server side, you can recover and keep your job running on another server and resume where you left off because your data is not tied to the specific server that had the failure. Whereas if you kind of follow the traditional direct attached model where you have direct attached storage and data is stored in shards that are then replicated across multiple nodes, there are challenges to that. There are sort of inefficiencies and limited flexibility that disaggregating storage from compute fixes. Another design pattern is consolidation, right? So we talked a little bit about ML ops. Well, one way of looking at it in all of these AI and analytics workflows, it's a pipeline with multiple stages. And sometimes there's loops in that pipeline, but for the most part, there are different things that need to happen to the data and your application over time or through steps. And when you have multiple applications tied to different steps in that pipeline and your data is sort of tied to the application and not consolidated, you have to do a lot of data copying. There's some inefficiencies. And at a minimum, even if the copying still has to get done given the logic of the application, you're managing lots of independent silos. There is, sort of big pools of trapped capacity and free capacity in those independent silos. And it adds management overhead. It adds inefficiencies in terms of your capital costs. And all of that kind of can improve when you consolidate your data onto one or maybe a very small number of data storage platforms. And the Pure Storage data platform helps make that happen. The third design pattern is containerization. Like if you've been working in this AI space or even kind of kick the tires and played around, what you'll see is a lot of the solutions and applications and code is containerized. It's designed and distributed as containers that you can run to create different, microservices, create different parts of that AI pipeline. When you've containerized your applications, when you're working with containers, one of the tools out there that is very powerful for enterprise operations is Kubernetes. So we're seeing a shift from kind of more traditional virtualization to containerization and Kubernetes. And when you're operating in a Kubernetes environment, that's where having statefulness, being able to persistently store your data, something that Kubernetes was not really designed for, becomes valuable when you're trying to work with data, build AI applications for persistence in Kubernetes. Having a reliable storage layer, a way to easily store data persistently and add statefulness to your services is valuable. And that's kind of where Portworx can really help customers that are trying to do this in production. And Portworx works with Pure's hardware, but it'll also work with direct attached storage or anybody's hardware.
In the cloud, in cloudy virtualized hardware. Yeah.
That's a great point. Portworx will run in the cloud as well. In fact, a lot of our Portworx customers are using it in the cloud rather than on physical infrastructure. So that's a powerful tool that can deliver on some of that containerization design pattern.
I think if it's all right, Miroslav, I'm going to summarize the next two pieces so we can have time left for section
Go ahead.
4, some of the new developments. And if you ever want the longer version of this, there's a whole team of AI and analytics FSAs. So some of also what we talk about here is around architectural choices. And the only reason I'm summarizing these is because they relate to things we've hit on before in Coffee Break. So design patterns you covered, awesome. Second, architectural choices that Pure has made around direct flash modules and how we can address the flash directly and the performance and scalability and endurance benefits and even cost benefits that gives. An intentional scale out architecture. Some of this is if you multiple products inside the Pure portfolio, but we've even done previous ones talking about the heart of FlashBlade and scale out, and even how we can minimize dependence on cache by going directly to the flash. So not having the limitations of cache-driven architectures. So those are key architectural choices for Pure that apply in this space. Third, there's some unique values, and those, if we just say them, can sound a little buzzwordy: efficiency, simplicity, flexibility, future-proof. But we've proven all of these out. Arrays that are it's a crazy high percentage, 97% plus of arrays that are 6 years old more Pure are still in production. They've been upgraded multiple times. The overhead of managing Pure systems and the flexibility. So this is even mining some of the past Coffee Break catalog. I think if it's all right, Miroslav, this is the kind of the business outcomes side of the principles we were talking about. Any final thoughts here before we jump into all the new cool stuff?
No, I mean, this is a nice summary. This is really kind of where a lot of the value is. And when you combine the design patterns with the unique architectural choices that we've made behind our products, you get these outcomes, right? You get to have accelerated model training, efficient inference, operational efficiency, and energy efficiency. One of the things we haven't touched on is just how power hungry GPUs are and
Yes.
how easy it is to kind of run out of power in your data center. So having, power efficiencies from your storage at least gives you a little bit of headroom. And then of course, cost efficiencies and the enterprise data management that people expect, right? So AI is new. A lot of previous AI was sort of kicking the tires and experimenting. But once you start building AI into your mission critical applications and processes, now you need to have disaster recovery strategies. You need to have backup. You need to have access controls and security. And all of those enterprise features, they're not necessarily standard in this AI world, but Pure makes that easy and accessible. So.
Love it. I almost feel like this is, as you know, we try to focus in on the landscape, but we're talking about this topic because there are some very unique, compelling benefits and outcomes that Pure can bring. You see that highlighted here, but we won't beat it to death. Let me go back ahead and share poll number 2 here so you can see. So this is, I think, what we might have been expecting, Miroslav, just from a General standpoint, 36% of folks starting to explore, 31% are experimenting. That's awesome. You're playing around with it. For you, they probably already knew the Hugging Face, site, or they've been there, or they were on it while we were talking, maybe. I don't know. And then it starts to kind of tail off a little bit as we go through. But there's 5% here that are on their second or third generation. So that's kind of neat to
That's
see.
exciting. Yeah,
Very cool.
that is really great.
Olivia, if you don't mind, go ahead and sharing poll number 3. And we'll dive into the last section here. Is just curious about what kind of use cases you're interested in, because we could have gone down a whole use case path. I feel like there's always more in this coffee break format we leave out than we cover, because these are big topics that we wander into. So first, there are, I think, really kind of 5 things here. There's some base pods, CVDs, OVX, ARI. But don't want to leave off GPU Direct, and I even want to kind of summarize that a little bit, just because we did introduce this in June of last year. So that was you can find a press release or a blog post, and there was even, this is to me actually an interesting insider discussion into how Pure chooses to develop products. We have to be aware of the market and buzzwords and what people are thinking about and talking about. But our development roadmap is driven by what has appreciable benefit for our customers. And so what we actually found was, for quite a while, we could drive the performance that we needed without GPU Direct. GPU Direct, in case you don't already know, GPUs could go directly to the storage instead of having an extra layer that they're running through. Hopefully the diagram even just kind of makes that clear, or maybe even just the name. What we found is that we could actually drive very similar performance, and so we focused our development efforts around things that were, frankly, of more value to our customers, but not saying that we weren't going to do this. And we did in June of last year. So it is there, and it matters in some cases, but we were actually able to do the underlying core Pure architecture. We didn't have to do GPU Direct as soon as maybe some other platforms, because of the performance that we could drive otherwise. So there was a fun discussion at one point where I was kind of digging in and understanding that. Next would be our partnership with NVIDIA, and a combination maybe there of BasePod and of OVX. You mind helping me out there with ARI and BasePod and OVX?
Sure. Sure. So Pure has actually been working with NVIDIA for a very long time. Like, we were one of the first companies to release a joint solution with NVIDIA that we called ARI, AI Ready Infrastructure. I think we first started selling that like back in 2018. And that idea kind of evolved and generalized by NVIDIA to what is now the BasePod reference architecture. And ARI is an instance of BasePod. We're BasePod certified. This approach basically makes it super easy to start small and scale, and to get started with like a best of breed turnkey solution that then, lets you take advantage of all of NVIDIA's kind of libraries and research and expertise, and know that it's going to run really, really well in that sort of BasePod solution. So that's that. We recently became OVX certified as well. So OVX is another initiative that NVIDIA is driving. This is for AI, but it's also for things like Omniverse and digital twins and kind of more operational AI and inferencing. So if you're trying to use it for your business, OVX might be kind of a good choice of hardware. And it uses sort of lower cost GPUs, compared to the H100s and H200s. The L40S GPUs are more affordable, and it works really well, and it works with Pure. So that's OVX, and those OVX servers come from the same server vendors that people are already familiar with.
So what I'm hearing you say is ARI not running in your basement, but you do have some OVX with the less expensive GPUs in your basement data center. Is that what I just say?
I wish. I basically have a gaming PC with like a nice NVIDIA card in it, but that's as much as is running at home. Our labs do have some OVX servers, so
They should, as they should, and even there's ARI too. If you've been to HQ sometimes, or even sometimes at trade shows. Sometimes, whenever you see a rack at a trade show at HQ, it's hard to know what's inside the rack. It always looks good, but there's actually this gear, as there should be. We're talking about it's a partnership. Okay, the other piece here then would go into For folks who are familiar with our partnership with Cisco around sometimes what's converged infrastructure, sometimes I like to call it a reference architecture on steroids, where it's more than the sum of its parts, but we've done a lot with FlashStack. Shout out to Craig Waters and other folks there for the many, many Cisco validated designs. There's a couple here that we've just released, and there's even one that's coming. So maybe I'll toss it back to you to talk about the two that just came out, if that's all right, and I'll just keep moving the
Sure.
slide.
Yeah, so as Andrew mentioned, we've been working with Cisco. We have a solution that we call FlashStack for AI, and we've also had that for many years. Recently, we've collaborated with Cisco to release a number of validated designs. So these are like very detailed reference architectures. One of them is for generative AI inferencing. So we talked about inferencing and generative AI and large language models. So if you want a solid solution that is integrated and has a validated design that you can follow to build this out, we have a Cisco CVD for generative AI with pure storage. And then the other one that's already published is kind of more generalized around ML ops, right? So if you're using more traditional AI algorithms like, categorization, image recognition, recommendation engines, even more like traditional statistical machine learning stuff like forecasting and predictions that can benefit from this Cisco validated design around AI and ML ops and how to build those frameworks, and workflows.
Think with that, if it's all right, time always flies. It is 52 minutes after the hour. And we are going to we still also have some time left for some Q&A. And I really appreciate, again, the folks on Josh and Robert and Melody. Actually, a lot of great discussion in the chat too. Some of it I see it coming to hosts and panelists. I'm like, oh, I want everyone to see this because it's fun stuff that people are saying. Let me go ahead and end the third poll, and we'll share back the results there so you can see, and we can see too. So there was actually from Joseph. I won't say your last name in case you don't want to be identified. He actually said that he's most interested in the opposite of chatbots, anti-chatbot detection. So, hey, there's another poll option. Maybe that would have gotten more votes. I don't know. And actually kind of evenly split here. So that's yeah,
Cool.
I'll just leave the results up here for a second. But hopefully
I
you
mean,
yeah, good.
one way I read those poll results is there's just a lot of interest, a lot of applications for AI. And, we're going to be busy doing AI things probably for the next decade because the demand is there, the interest is there. And I think people really see the potential for their businesses.
So before we get to the Q&A, I want to respect everyone who may have possibly stayed around for the drawing. Miroslav, as well, I'm not done with you yet, so don't leave. But we're done the formal part. This is where we let our hair down, such as it is not for both of us, kind of thing. But so be it. Hopefully you felt like you learned a good bit. You learned more about Pure and what we do in this space. Obviously, there's way more that we can talk about, so please don't hesitate to reach out. This is a monthly series, so I hope that you will join us next month with Justin Emerson. And for those of you who haven't, thank you, Olivia, for putting the link in the chat. Make sure to look in the chat because you can sign up for next month. And we do have a drawing, and the winner for that is Brian G. from Texas. This is the Pure Coffee Lover set. There's a Yeti mug in there. I want to say it's similar to this one, obviously not exactly the same. There's a Metropolis coffee bag in a wonderful gift box there. And I want to say the retail value is $132. So, it's a significant thing. Brian G., congratulations. You will be hearing from us. Please make sure, again, got to do the advertisement. Make sure to join us next month. And hey, we still do have a couple minutes left for questions. I think I've got two here that I want to make sure to pose to you, Miroslav, but I want to make sure, is there anything that I was wrapping up at the end? Is there anything that I kept you from putting in that you wanted to toss in first before we do questions?
Let me just check my notes. No, I think we touched on all of the key topics that we wanted to discuss.
We did plan a little bit, not like word for word, but we were planning. So make it where this is about respecting the audience and making it worthwhile for you. So maybe I'm gonna toss. There's a question here I know I wanted to put in, and this was actually Robert did a great job of answering this already, but thought it'd be worthwhile for the audience. So from Guillermo, I think I'm saying the name right. Is the user or could the user be capable of placing a hard stop on hallucinations, the authoritative wrong answers, by having rules in place that doesn't permit unsubstantiated answers? So just maybe the factors around hallucination and how to handle that and prevent it.
Yeah, I mean,
In an AI context, as always, to be clear, hopefully.
yeah. Well, that's a whole other topic. I think if we look at the landscape, there's more loosening to allow more hallucinations in other contexts. But in the context of AI and preventing hallucination, there's a number of different techniques that are out there. Taking advantage of those vector databases and RAG is a big part of it, because then you get, substantiated, meaningful information. There are ways to add additional guardrails that will sort of, fact check and sanity check the responses before you serve them. And then kind of, as Robert mentioned, prompt engineering, making sure that how you're writing the prompts to the actual LLM is also structured in a way that minimizes the chance of hallucination, right? So like what a user types into the chat box and what the actual LLM gets as a prompt and, that it responds to don't have to be the same. You can do a bunch of prompt engineering sort of behind the scenes to prevent hallucinations. And a lot of the AI application development work is this prompt engineering and trying to figure out how do you go from, what someone asks you to what you're asking the LLM to, work on.
Try one more. And for those hanging out with us, if you're worried about gift cards, etc., we're done, but we're just trying to be helpful with questions. So I think I'll throw one last one in, and then we will wrap up here. There was one from Maria, which I felt like maybe a good ending one. For us, for you guys, what are the biggest challenges to building an AI product? Could you list the top three? So obviously this is going to be a little bit of stream of consciousness top of mind, which is totally fine, Miroslav. So um, challenges to building an AI project. What comes to mind in the top minute or two?
Well, so having data, like having clean data that is accessible and that you can work with, and that, like, it's often the exceptions in your data that kind of trip you up, and being able to know your data well enough to either pick out and filter out those exceptions or include them in and make sure that your product deals with those exceptions well. That's a challenge. Another one is having people that understand this space well enough. As Andrew mentioned, the amount of knowledge around working with AI models is, becoming a little bit more mainstream. There's lots of resources, but the people that know how to do this well and understand this space are still, few and far between. So having the staff and the resources to really do this well is a challenge. And then the other one is understanding that ML ops workflow and how to really implement it in a productionized way, I think is something that is challenging because it's very nuanced and easy to sort of miss some details. And, that's one of those live and learn spaces. Everyone's going to
How
make
you
some
learn.
mistakes and learn from them and improve. But, the more you can leverage others' experience, the easier it's going to be to get into production sooner. So.
Awesome. Thank you. With that, we'll let the music play a little bit again. As make sure to highlight, please join us next month with Justin Emerson. 1+1=3, the outsized impact, taking Flash from niche to mainstream. My name is Andrew Miller,
Well,
your host for Coffee Break. Miroslav, yes, you're the last thought.
no. I'm seeing all these welding questions showing up, and people really want to know. So I would say it depends on the kind of welding you want to do. If you want to do fine detail stuff, TIG is the best. If you're working with kind of more industrial stuff, stick is great, and MIG sort of is in the middle. So if you're like building furniture or doing sort of more home scale stuff, MIG can be a great option for you.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, Peter, for putting that in. I was like, man, it's like I've got AI questions. Do I put in the water one? So hey, I'm glad to try it again. Miroslav, thank you for jumping in. This is relaxed as always. So I'll try again. Second time. On behalf of Pure Storage, I am your host, Andrew Miller, lead principal technology here at Pure. Miroslav, global practice lead for AI. I think you understand why. Thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of the entire Coffee Break team, thank you. Hope you enjoy your coffee gift card, and everything you're doing this month. Please join us again next month. Have a great day.